This is the DP Show,
where insanity sounds sane.
And now, the man, the myth, the legend in his own mind, D. Palmer.
All right, thank you for logging on and joining us for this installment of the DP Show online, as I've been teasing and promising a full explanation and a discussion on the Penn State sanctions. Finally have them up for you now, and we're going to be using primarily for an outline of our discussion a column that you can find at College Football News from Matt Zemek, where he has written a lot of interesting things that we can take in a lot of different directions, and guess what? We are. But just as a quick refresher, all of the commentary that has been coming out since then has largely been driven by people's beliefs of what should or should not happen before any of this went down, especially that this was not a football matter, that all of the crimes that Jerry Sandusky committed against children had nothing to do with the football program, which I have completely argued to death that, yes, it had everything to do with it, because Penn State and Joe Paterno did everything that they could to allow Sandusky to prey upon these children and rape these boys in Penn State showers because they did not want this negative attention being driven toward the football program. Or just like so many other schools go out and promise all these athletes money, cars, women, whatever, to come and play at State U, Penn State was essentially doing the same thing, just in a completely different angle, whereas everybody else is saying, hey, come play football for me and I'll give you these great things. Penn State was saying, pay no attention to the horrible thing that's going on behind that curtain, just come play football for me. Or in other words, they were trying to gain a recruiting advantage. I've already talked about that enough, but that is why this is a football matter. The other argument has been that by punishing Penn State, you're punishing the innocent. You're punishing all of the other non-profit, non-revenue programs, your programs at Penn State's athletic department, I should say. You're punishing all of the businesses that rely on all these hundreds of thousands of people that come to Penn State for football games and stay in hotels and eat food and all that stuff. My question was, how is this any different than punishing Iraqis with sanctions that starved 500,000 kids to death because they have Saddam Hussein leading their country? To me, it seems like it's the same thing. You have innocent people who are suffering because of what one person is doing. You have innocent people suffering because of what four people chose to do because one person was doing something horrible with Penn State. Okay? But now the question has become, what about all the other sanctions, or how is this fair related to the stuff that has happened recently with other athletic programs, especially two, one in the Big Ten, Ohio State, and the other, as I've been talking about a lot with you, Southern California. For example, Ohio State, it was discovered, had players getting benefits and money and favors that amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially in the forms of tattoos and little, I guess you might call them petty, transactions for football helmets, pads, autograph jerseys, whatever. And it was discovered that their head coach at the time knew about all this stuff that was going on, Jim Tressel. Tressel knew that all this stuff was going on and essentially covered it up. Much like Joe Paterno did, he knew what Sandusky was doing and didn't report it and covered it up. All right? Because Tressel knew that some of his players were getting benefits outside of everything that they were promised in their scholarship. He not only was fired, but there's been a show cause flag attached to his name. I don't know what the exact term is, where anybody in the NCAA that wants to hire him to coach football has to show a reason that they should do that rather than all these other guys that are available. Because he knew his players were taking benefits. He's essentially been blacklisted from ever coaching college football again because he knew his players were taking extra benefits, monetary benefits. Now, when you go on the other side of that coin, and Joe Paterno, of course, is dead, and it's probably fortunate for him because he'd have some pretty ugly legal battles that he's going to have to fight here. But why is this different that he allowed how many boys to be sexually assaulted by this monster, and all he loses is 111 victories off of his title, and that's posthumously? Okay, Joe Paterno, if he were alive, would still be able to coach football in the NCAA after allowing all of these rapes to occur. Jim Tressel allows his players to sell their stuff for money, and he's blackballed. Nobody's talking about whether or not that's fair. Everybody's worried about all the vendors and all that stuff, and that's something to worry about. Yes, but what about these most recent sanctions, like at USC? And I've been talking about this one to death. because the NCAA did almost nothing to demonstrate that USC was guilty of anything besides not cooperating. And they were able to craft an argument that USC's lawyers believed would not have held water in a legal court. And we're going to find out whether or not it's going to in a civil court, as Todd McNair is suing a lot of different people because of this, for wrongful termination, among other things. But here's USC, essentially, because it did not cooperate, is going to suffer through 3 years of probation, 3 years, 30 scholarships. Penn State, a little bit more cooperative, but still rather uncooperative, 4-year probation and 40 scholarships, in addition to a $60 million fine. How is this fair? USC is not aware, so it claims, that Reggie Bush's parents are living in a house at reduced rent in San Diego. USC, of course, is in L.A., and the argument was, how can we know what a player's parents? It's hard enough to know what all these players are doing, but their parents are receiving benefits 75 miles away. How are we supposed to know that? You should have. 3 years, 30 million, or 3 years, 30 scholarships. Penn State knew. Jerry Sandusky was raping kids in showers. 4 years, 40 scholarships, and still the question remains: well, is this a football issue? It's not. Is this a fairness issue? Because if you look at the horror that surrounded Penn State's misdeeds, it seems like what was happening at Ohio State and USC is almost nothing, whether or not it was directly related to the football team. And as I have argued, Penn State's almost certainly was. Okay? But now here's getting into Matt Zemek. He asked some questions further about these different scholarships, arguing that the NCAA has overstepped its bounds, very much so. He said in his article, which can be found at collegefootballnews.com, that he wrote, "Let this sentence sink into your mind. The reduction of access to a free education will send a message about protecting a sexual predator. It makes no sense whatsoever, correct? Yet that's what Emmert is essentially saying with the scholarship reductions he is opposing. It's absurd. It may be, except here's the argument that he's making, that this is, again, punishing the innocent, and that he is essentially taking 40 scholarships total, or 10 scholarships a year, away from kids who would need this to otherwise, who otherwise would not be able to go get a college education. That is simply not true. That it is simply plain and simply false. It is patently false, because those 40 scholarships are still going to be available just at other institutions. And it's not as if Penn State grads are the only ones who are getting hired anymore. Okay, these 40 football players are still going to be able to go find a place to play football. It's just basic economics. You're not forever removing 40 scholarships out of the scholarship pool. It's the same argument that's made about why we can't, say, reduce the size of government or the government workforce, or bring a bunch of troops home, or close a bunch of bases. Oh my gosh, these people say, what are we going to do with all these out-of-work people if we were actually going to cut all this government spending? There would be so much unemployment. All these people would be unemployed for a month or so until the capital readdresses itself and gets put into a productive area of the economy. Same thing here. These 40 scholarship players are now going to go play somewhere else. Someplace that's not allowing monsters to rape kids in their showers. Okay, they're still going to get scholarships. In fact, they're probably going to get better scholarships because they're probably going to be playing football, most of these guys. So one coach said that Penn State's players, their second and third stringers, are definitely better than a lot of their starters and maybe even their stars. These guys are actually going to have a chance to go play football rather than just have the privilege of wearing Penn State uniforms. Okay, so this idea that there are college athletes that are being punished for this is just not true, because they are going to have opportunities to go out there and play collegiate football, just not at Penn State. Just not at Penn State. In fact, the Big Ten's already said, go to any other school in the conference. Those scholarships are available, just not at Penn State. They have not been removed. They are not off the table. Nobody is being punished in that way. Okay? But then Zemek goes on further and makes a case about whether or not we have now cracked open the box of a benevolent dictator. That Emmert, as president of the NCAA, has now crowned himself emperor of college athletics because he is ruling on things that do not involve college athletics, according to Matt Zemek. He writes, Yet it is healthy to establish as an organizational and operational practice the creation of a benign dictator, not benevolent, benign, model of governance. Question mark. Make no mistake about this. Emmert has traveled this route. He created a lack of institutional control in his presser as the reason for levying these punishments against Penn State. That was the bylaw violation Emmert felt he needed in order to proceed in this direction. However, Emmert never explained precisely why or how the lack of institutional control was violated in this case. He did not take the public through a clear and structured bylaw-based process that could justify his actions. Question, Zemek, when has this ever been the case? Or just go back to when the USC Trojans were sanctioned on a bogus case where the NCAA actually went through and said, we feel that we have established this thusly, when they got they are working off of a Yahoo press story. They're working off of a very imaginative phone record where McNair called twice a cell phone number that turned out to be well, not necessarily an agent, but an advisor, so to speak, of one of these recruits that he was trying to get. Not because he was trying to recruit the kid through that guy. He was just trying to figure out where the kid was. And these were the numbers that he had. And when he realized that this was not the kid's number, he hung up. He made 2 one-minute phone calls. 1 minute does not mean he was on the phone for 1 minute. It means that somebody picked up the phone or he went to voicemail. And the NCAA is saying that in particular, in addition to Paul D's comment about how the high-profile players involve or require high-profile management, that is all that they had hanging on USC, which led to 3 years of sanctions and probation. Or essentially the dictatorship, if it wasn't already was going on back when USC was ruled, because that case would not hold a drop of water in a legal courtroom. And where it doesn't have to be near as stringent in the civil courtroom, it's going to be the same thing. I have no reason to doubt, and I'm not a lawyer, but Todd McNair is going to come out of this with a lot of money because he was not, they showed no reasonable, or they had no justified reasoning in putting the show cause penalty on his name also, where he was blacklisted just like Tressel was. Okay? The benevolent dictatorship has been going on. This has been happening for some time now. This has been NCAA sports. And the question that then I think naturally comes as a result of this, and I think this is what was most interesting when Larry Scott was going toward the super conferences a couple summers ago. Looked like the Pac-10 was going to be the Pac-16 because it was going to take so much of the Big 12. You may remember some of that. The interesting notion was going to be, why do all of these really big schools that are making up the really big conferences need the NCAA? Right? The whole benevolent dictatorship thing is something that we as people historically have insisted upon because we are not comfortable making our own decisions. I'm saying we like I'm part of that. I'm really talking to some of you out there. You need to suck it up and say no to these benevolent dictators, these benign dictators. All right, because this is all that Emmert's doing is everything that has been done before him from everybody in his position, because that is what we have been wanting them to do. What would have made so much more sense, and going back to the question here that got me into this rant, why do we need the NCAA? Why indeed? The NCAA shouldn't have to tell Penn State, when somebody is molesting children on your campus, stop it. Why do we need the NCAA to say that? All right, the NCAA as an institutional organization doesn't have any place in judging against and prosecuting anybody's morality. People should already have those morals. This is a no-brainer. If somebody is doing horrible things to children, you stop it. Whether or not that leads to football wins, you stop it. And if we as people, or the Big Ten, or the other schools that potentially could go into a partnership with Penn State, which is all these football games are, all right, these are fiscal partnerships, right? Oregon right now is paying a bunch of chumps almost $1 million to come get beat up now because of the popularity that is surrounding the Ducks. That's a fiscal arrangement. These schools want money. Oregon can give them money. If you don't want to go into that partnership with somebody because they are doing something horrible to children that you do not approve of because you have some sort of morality behind you, don't do it. We shouldn't need the NCAA to have to say that. If you're so offended by what was happening at Penn State, don't watch them. Write a letter to ABC and ESPN and everybody else and say, I am sickened by what Penn State did, and I will not participate in any sort of Penn State programming. And if enough people did that, and ESPN realized every time it put Penn State on the TV, they wouldn't stop doing it because they're losing money at this point. All right? You don't need the NCAA to tell you how to respond to this morality issue. You should have your own. And if you're sickened by what happened at Penn State, you can do something about it. You can stop it. Because as soon as these people lose your money, then they're going to start doing things differently. If Penn State understood that by not exposing a rapist for the interest of its football program, then it would have done something differently if it was going to cost them a bunch of money. Not necessarily a $60 million edict from the NCAA, but from all of you. Okay? We're really in control of all these situations because they need us. They need our money more than anything. And if they're offending your morals or your sensibility, pull the plug. Stop it. Who needs the NCAA to do that? Nobody. That's who. Benign dictator. We don't need you. Okay? All we need to do is be grown up. It's the same argument about movies I've been making for years and years. People complain about how bad movies are. Batman, for example, what a letdown that was. Well, I quit going to movies because they're terrible. And it's not worth my time. And as soon as everybody else gets in line there, we might actually have some good films to watch. Well, if we stop supporting these programs, or whatever they are, it doesn't have to be football, they'll get in line. They'll get in line. I would love for you to tell me I'm wrong. You can go over to the iTalk 106.7 Facebook page and let me have it. Go down here into the comments at YouTube and let me have it. Or shoot me an email at dspalmer@lexmalabooks.com and let me have it. Love to hear from you. This has been a big podcast about the Penn State sanctions, and thank you so much for tuning in here. We'll talk to you soon on iTalk 106.7.